Welcome, Bani. Thanks so much for joining us here at Karlsruhe University of Arts and Design. The stage is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here today. I'm going to talk about the fog of systems, but just for the sake of survival, let's imagine you're in the middle of a very wet and fresh fog right now, so you would probably deal with the temperature. The fog system is this little booklet. It's like a long form, basically, which is a very humble attempt at ordering and putting some ideas across regarding my own practice as a curator and an educator. So I'm not a philosopher, I'm not a media theorist. I like to observe things, and if I can, to fuel things, actually in different fields, not just the arts, but also design, and also technopolitics in a way. And I like the idea that we need some kind of creativity in all these fields to deal with the challenges we are facing. So that's the motivation behind this little essay, and it comes from the practice. It comes from the observation of artistic and design and technology practices, counter-technology practices. So next, I can see you. Do we have images? Good, super. That's me. The one before? Yeah. That's me. These are things that have been co-started, especially the first three ones, and the last one is just new. I've been asked to join the curatorial team for Transmediale 2023, so I actually hope I will join you. I will see you in Berlin next year in February. Next. The interface is a bit slow, but yeah, it's human interface. Thanks, by the way. Thank you very much for the help. So I wanted to start with a quote. Why the fog of systems? What does that mean? I mean, I got inspiration from a quote by former U.S. Defense Secretary under Kennedy and Johnson between 61 and 68, if I'm not wrong. At some point he said, Robert McNamara, he said at some point, what the fog of war means is that war is so complex that it's beyond the ability of the human mind to comprehend all the variables. Our judgments, our understanding are not adequate, and we kill people unnecessarily. McNamara was like an economist. He came from Ford Motor Company. He wanted to use system analysis data to fix the army and possibly to win the war. At the end, he resigned. Vietnam was a huge fuck up, as you know. But besides the story and the history of this quote, it's interesting to understand this idea of fog of war and to translate to the fog of systems. And it's also interesting because it can be, as often is the case, when you understand metaphors, you understand that something more is behind the simple metaphor. And the fog, as the cloud, is an interesting, actually a revealing metaphor. The cloud is up there. The fog is something heavier. The fog is among us. Actually, I just realized that there's this term, the fog computing, is used in engineering to actually describe the Internet of Things. But I didn't have that in mind when I thought of the fog of systems. I just thought this complexity, this huge complexity that makes us wander in doubt, facing challenges we don't fully understand or grasp, and we might kill people unnecessarily. Next. These observations are actually pretty basic and simple, And but from my perspective, from my own perspective, what was really interesting to me was to notice that there was some kind of a new generation of artists. When I say new, it's just like whatever, last decade, probably 2 decades, and probably some historian of the arts will probably trace it down back in a farther away past, but I don't care. Just for the sake of my argument, I'm just saying that there was a generation of artists raised between the end of the analog media era and the beginning of the age of, not just the internet, but rather say the ubiquitous digital quantification. And this generation of artists have begun to explore, or did explore, sometimes in very unusual ways, as we can see in this image by Trevor Paglen, this vast network of infrastructures that actually wire the planet that we inhabit. And I'm not referring only to communication networks, like in the image we saw before. I'm literally thinking of the intricate mesh of systems that are increasingly more and more responsible of many aspects of our lives. From global logistics, the huge systems and very complex systems that get the package at your door when you buy something with your credit card in 24 hours. In the future, possibly even less, you're gonna get the object that you just purchased. But also, scientific observation, planning, urban planning or agricultural planning, social media, policing, waste management. Everything runs with a really intricate mesh of systems, and that's the challenges. And the infrastructures are usually those material systems that stay below. Infra means below. And these systems are those things that are meant not to be visible, that allow for things, stuff, bodies, emotions, ideas to travel, to move around. It really looks like a very boring and dull territory for artists, It's really boring. Thanks for engineers. However, this interest on the poetics and the politics of infrastructures actually provoked a huge shift at the very core of human imagination, I would say. And that shift is the balance between what can be seen and what is not immediately apparent, what is left unsaid, what is disturbingly opaque, or what is just plain and simply concealed for political, economic, or even cultural reasons. Next. The point is that these processes are not just out of sight. Most of the time, they are beyond the reach of our understanding, or even beyond the imagination. There's nothing really new here. It's not the first time in history that these things happen. And actually, when we studied the network infrastructures, we know that they have become the main stage for key transformations in society, from citizenship, public space, even democracy. Now we know that large-scale systems act sometimes as spectral, behind-the-scenes machinery. Sometimes they act as the undead, zombies, zombie entities. Sometimes they act as like drug-like accelerators for our actions and our emotions. In all these cases, they constantly renegotiate the very notion of human agency. I'm still putting the human being at the center of things, and you know that we will probably have to shift this perspective at some point. But what I really want to stress here, that this is not just media theory. As I said at the beginning, I'm not a media theorist, I'm not a philosopher. I wish I were, but I'm not. This is out of the observation of things that are happening around me, in the art scene and in society at large. So this is about the political and aesthetic circumstances that I am living, that most of us are living, I guess, at the moment. For instance, this state of emergency which permeates our society, it's really palpable, it's really touchable, especially in the last couple of years, But even before the COVID pandemic, and other real emerging circumstances, the heat wave, we're reading about that in the news, But also the avian flu, we are not reading about that in the news that much, but it's also happening. I mean, they're killing animals right now as we speak, just to get rid of this other pandemic. So we know that there are some like palpable circumstances that talk about collapse of natural resources and their reproduction cycles. But also, and this would be like the planetary side, the material side, but there's also like, again, a human side to that. For instance, think of the growing sensation of ungovernability. I'm talking about governments, yeah, on one side, but also the ungovernability of society, which might be, from an anarchist perspective, even interesting, you know. But now it looks more and more like a mess, like chaos, you know. Governments that come and go all the time, they seem completely incapable to deal with this complexity. And then if you move down to the intimate, to the personal sphere, you can see that the sense of anxiety that most of us, I guess, feel in this world is also part of that. And, you know, our really ambitious fantasies, but then the precarity of our lives, at any stage, like a middle-aged white man like me, privileged one probably, and younger students at the academy, for instance, and so on and so forth. So these are the circumstances we are trying to deal with. All these phenomena, I guess, are related to processes of planetary scale computation in a surprisingly direct ways, in my opinion. At least this is my take. Next. Here you can see like two random and very well-known examples of this idea of infrastructures as something not really easy to comprehend and grasp. In the background you can see the algorithmic architecture of some Amazon fulfillment center. We're talking about metaphors. Interesting name, you know, fulfillment center. Which is an algorithmic architecture, but it's also an architecture of labor, as you probably know already. It's a space that is not designed for humans. I mean, humans are just like under the software, under the API labor. In the little image on the top right is another image you probably have seen at some point. It's how it's called, the heat map by this Strava app. It's an app for jogging, for training, and you wear this smart device while you run, and this app actually tracks you and tells you how good you did, etc., etc. The point is that the Strava architecture, data architecture, actually made this data available to the company, of course, and this company in turn decided, I don't know why, it's totally absurd, decided to use these heat maps made of data made by people running around as some kind of PR campaign. So they published a fairly big set of images. This one has been recorded at the Burning Man. It looks like the Pentagon, but it is the Burning Man in Nevada. But you can easily find on the internet, actually on Strava website. I didn't check recently, but until a few months ago it was online, believe it or not. These heat maps about people running with the Strava app on in very weird locations, for instance in Afghanistan, where people wearing a Strava device or Strava app were not supposed to be. There was nothing on the map there, but then you realize that there was a secret military base in some secret location in Afghanistan. So these things are not accidental in some way, but the impact they're having on our society and on our idea of public space, on our idea of social relationship, on our ideas of relationship with the planet itself are kind of weird, are kind of ungraspable in a way. And for sure, some parts of this infrastructured world have reached us, have reached us very faster than our capacity to understand fully what they mean. Otherwise, you wouldn't understand why Strava would use these images for PR purposes. And it didn't make sense if you think about it, the implications of that. So, my point is, the scale, the materiality, the technical complexity of such an accidental megastructure pose a challenge to human orientation. We don't know where we are. We don't know where the horizon is. And it requires a completely different approach to sensing. We cannot deal and trust our senses anymore. We need other ways of sensing, probably not fully human, because of their scale or because of their sources. Next. Do you remember Alice in Wonderland when she falls into the rabbit hole and she discovers that ingesting certain substances causes her to change size? For Alice, this revelation provides both challenge and an opportunity, as you probably remember, because each shift of scale alters her perspective and her relationship to Wonderland, complicating actually her quest to map the full terrain and the logics behind the Wonderland. There are different steps in the story of Alice at this point, when she falls in the rabbit hole. At the beginning, she feels that everything really looks wrong size, starting from her body. Then when she understands what provokes what, she starts to manage and discipline her scale changes. She understands that eating that or drinking that, she becomes bigger or smaller. And finally, she finds the way to unlock the door. And as you remember, she falls into this other world, in Wonderland, actually. And Wonderland is a new world that does not accept her. And that's her reaction, you know. She says, I wish the creatures wouldn't be so easily offended. You know, the cards, for instance. It's a different world. There is this idea comes, I'm not this smart. This comparison comes from a really interesting book called The Cosmic Zoom by Zachary Horton, who says, quote, the old-fashioned, comforting human scale has crumbled, and our species now stands poised between global climate change and big data. It's next slide. It's like humanity in Wonderland. We are hit constantly by things that are either super huge, so much bigger than us, or tiny and invisible. Something that is incredibly fast, like, I don't know, finance, or incredibly slow, like geological formation of minerals and whatnot. In Wonderland, we as humanity find ourselves in a very paradoxical situation. Because we did build powerful lenses to observe the world, including technologies that are really sophisticated to capture the invisible or the incredibly complex. And also we made like this worldwide popular media as some sort of a real-time system to express our human condition for millions and actually billions of humans on the surface of the planet. And yet, when everything is potentially observable, what these lenses could be used for, where to look, and how the imbalance of power is embedded in them, that becomes a political and cultural matter. So the result of this is that we are facing a very sinister totality. We have this sense of this huge machine that we built that we cannot steer anymore. Another result is the increase of the sense of abstraction, but at the same time we're dealing with a plethora of details in our lives, you know, the infinite scroll on Instagram, like we're bombarded by images, and each of which requires our attention, our response, and that's just a detail. It's a tiny detail working on the top of a huge abstraction behind it. So, what are the coordinates of this very sinister totality? Because there's no fixed horizon. That's not a linear, sense of time. before and the after, the up and the down, the in and out. These frontiers seem to change all the time and to become like thicker in some cases and invisible in others. And next. That's like the premise, the introduction to my argument. And my argument is basically twofold. The first part of my argument is like recalls a little bit of media theory, of course. And this first part is that we probably need new models besides the obvious humanistic approach. If we really want to creatively focus on the assemblage of material resources, human-made infrastructures, people's habits, people's dreams, non-human intentionalities, because they are non-human because they come from other species, or non-human because they are bigger than human. They are like gigantic database systems, for instance, object recognition. They may build like some sort of intentionalities beyond our understanding when they are applied to some specific fields. So basically we need new concepts to visualize the ongoing changes, as well as the latent or less visible conflicts and frictions within them. Here you can see a few examples. I'm not going to go through them, you probably know them, and some are, in my opinion, more interesting than others. The ones in, you can see the gray media, disobedient objects, haunted machines. They are really interesting approaches to this idea of complexity, this sinister totality. Gray media comes from Matthew Fuller and Goffey, talking about the connection between systems. So the interesting part is the connector, not the system in itself. The connector tells a lot. Haunted machines is a way to understand machines as like spectral things. They're like specters within the machines. Intentions, motivation, forks. The idea of repair and maintenance by Shannon Mattern is also really interesting. We should not think of technology or systems as monoliths. They're just like often inconsistent and full of cracks, full of soldering, full of stitches, things, you know. So we should probably point our attention to the stitches, not to the big construction. Maintenance and repair is a normal condition of all these systems, so let's not take them for granted. Let's not imagine this big system as something that cannot be changed. And finally, the stack model by Benjamin Bratton, I'm not going to go into that because I assume most of you know about it already, is also an interesting map to understand this complexity and to reimagine the relationships between parts of this system of systems. Next. That was the first part of my argument. We need models, new models to understand complexity and to find entry points into that. The second part of my argument is about the artistic practice. It's about artistic research. And as I said at the beginning, artists, and artists actually in a very broad sense. I'm including experimental designers here, creative activists, critical technologists, and artists in a proper sense, in a traditional sense. From all these different fields, we find people that actually have started to realize that these lenses can be slightly changed or turned towards other part of this system of systems. And of course, if we want to deal with the dramatic imbalance of power that is leading our civilization towards such a massive systemic crisis, the one we are actually facing right now, these lenses should not be left in the hands of large corporations or in the hands of the military or the bureaucratic apparatus of the state. We also need to take over to try to deal with these things, even though there's a huge imbalance of power. We know that. In some state agency, the government spending millions about these things. We don't have that kind of resources, but all the more reason to try to, open the door of Wonderland, to unlock those technologies. So there is an interesting little essay by design theorist Matthew Fuller from, I guess it's not new, it's from 2008, I guess, about artistic methodologies. When I'm talking about artistic research, I'm using this like as some sort of, catch-all term to understand or to describe how artistic and creative practice can find shortcuts, can find different approaches to that. And this article by Matthew Fuller, talking precisely about artistic methodologies, is a really nice example of why the artistic practice are or can be understood as methodologies. A little aside about this, because the terminology that Fuller uses about this is really revealing. I don't know exactly what he had in mind when he was writing this short essay, but he talks about second-order memetics as one of the artistic methodologies. He talked about practices of the unready. He was talking about the punk and the curiously ignorant practices. He was talking about practices of producing times. He's a theorist. It sounds all fairly abstract, but all the more reasons to apply these notions to the practice of creators. And also, there may be other artistic methodologies. I don't know. This is just Matthew Fuller's proposition. But I found this idea interesting because it brings focus and a sense of excitement and urgency, which is something that some artists are really good at. They build excitement. They build like a connection, and that's why we need art. I know it sounds totally obvious, but sometimes I feel that, especially because I teach also in design schools, and sometimes they don't get it. Why should we go the longer path when you can go straight to the point? And what I say is that's not the longest path. It's just a different path, and you encounter different things on that path. And I'm not especially a big fan of transdisciplinary approaches. I don't think that art is or has to be transdisciplinary. I'd rather say that art should be indisciplinary. To pick things from here and there and reassemble those things in a different way. But aside that, next. So, the second part of my argument, I'm gonna go fast on this now, are about these artistic practices. Next. I try to sum them up in very basic categories. These are a really practical taxonomy. Again, I'm not a philosopher. I'm not interested in making philosophical models. This is just a roadmap, a practical one, that comes out of my own experience, and my experience is limited probably, not probably, surely. And, but I found this useful just to detect things that are happening. The first two ones do not need more explanations. Unlearning to see like humans is actually a phrasing by Trevor Paglen. You remember the image I showed at the very beginning, this out of focus image. It's a project called Limit Telephotography, and Trevor Paglen was trying to depict some hidden military bases related to US policies in the Middle East. And so he took these pictures that don't mean anything. You cannot look at things in these pictures most of the times, because he was taking these pictures from 20 or 30 miles away. So it was actually hard to see anything in these images. And he said, this is precisely the point. There is something that we cannot see, that we have to learn to see in different ways, not through our eyes. That would be learning to see like humans. I'm just skimming over this. But it gives you an idea. The second one, the counter-forensic approach, is something that we've been talking about earlier, and you probably know about it. And one of the main, or probably clearest example of this would be in the next slide. This work by Vlad and Yoler with Matteo Pasquinelli, in some cases with Kate Crawford and others, about trying to unmount daily technologies and to see the complexity. We could spend hours talking, probably days, talking about the counter-forensic approach. I will not go into that right now, but the counter-forensic, as Arif said earlier today, is about making these things public. The term forensic comes from forum, like public forum in ancient Rome, because public in a different sense than today, but you got that. And also forensic is trying to detect something that happened in the past, to detect movement, for instance, detect relationships through an object. And this is also interesting because it requires to focus on a different threshold, as A.L. Wiseman from forensic architecture would say, a threshold of detectability. There's something that we cannot detect, and counter-forensic approaches can help us to see something that our eyes, our bodies cannot see. And especially it was interesting in violence. As the title of one of these works says, violence at the threshold of detectability. But I'm going to move fast on this. So next. The third practice that I'm interested in here would be exploring new geographies. What does that mean? We think of geography, we think of maps. Drawing a map always implies to locate yourself in a point, in a space. And yet, as you look up and draw new frontiers between what is known and what is uncharted, which is one of the main purposes of a map, you know? You draw a map, which is what you know, and you stop your map when you reach something that you don't know, the unknown. So when you're doing that, you are implicitly also creating a cartography of future changes in terms of movements. When you're drawing a map, you're implying that that map will be used by someone to move across that territory. So you're probably inviting people to do that, to live, to inhabit your map. And with movements come interactions, with parts, with things, with beings that inhabit that territory, with different spaces, because that's your map depiction of your space, but there might be a different depictions of that same space. Time, other people's lives, other animal lives, vegetal, mineral geographies that your map is trying to depict. So, to a certain extent, the act of mapping also implies the danger and the enchantment of the invisible, of the still unnamed, or the unconnected. And actually, if you think about it, this might also be the reason why, historically speaking, maps have been made not just by official cartographers or by military or scientific missions. In the history of mapping, of cartography, you will see that many maps were actually drawn by independent explorers, by outcasts, by pirates, by visionaries. That's really, really interesting. Because mapping now, today, and always, mapping new territories actually requires something different. It mutates into something that requires an assemblage of practices, of reverse engineering, social engineering, urban exploration, even performance, as we would see in a minute, historical research, etc., etc. The image we're seeing here is a good example of that. It's not a super new project. It's called Sprawling Swamps by a Dutch artist called Femke de Graven. You probably know her. And this is like a digital environment that actually is based on the idea of terraforming. Terraforming of this idea of, terraforming is a term used to explain practices of making the outer space habitable by human beings. But someone at some point, and Femke is doing this right now with this project, used that term terraforming to talk about the Earth. We should terraform the Earth to make the Earth habitable again, because we made it uninhabitable, maybe. So, it's interesting because Femke de Graven, for several years, did some project about finance. And she was interested in the material infrastructure of finance. But, so she documented various aspects of financial infrastructures. And she realized how much they depended on secrecy on one side. On the other side, on the control of land and the sea. And a new perspective actually emerged in her work when she approached a contested region as the Arctic region. Because in the Arctic region, the geopolitical tensions between nation states become even stronger, because the territory itself is actually fading or shifting due to climate change. It's changing. So the boundary between land and sea is unstable, and as well the boundary between the ground and the underground, the habitable and inhabitable, and also what is habitable not by human beings, by infrastructures. For instance, like the optic fiber cable that connects London to Tokyo, and that could actually turn into, be like a few dozens of milliseconds faster than the usual connections. So, Sprawling Swamps, this project, is a digital environment in which like visionary infrastructural projects are developed for locations like the Arctic that are unstable. For instance, in Sprawling Swamps, you will find like a digital representation and like a speculative design about a territory made of ocean waves, or melting ice, or erupting volcanoes, or shifting shorelines and sinking islands. And Grafen made projects about these territories. They are not territory in the usual sense, because these locations reveal the contradictions, and the new forms of exploitation within the contemporary financial geography. It's interesting because this is not a documentary approach. It resembles more like speculative design, but it also goes further than speculative design. Speculative design at some point, probably we'll have the chance to talk about it later, but speculative design sometimes is concerned about building like a consistent version of an alternative or future world. And I think that these representations in Femke Grafen's work are actually questioning this idea of a consistent alternative or speculative world. They're not totally consistent. They're open-ended in a way. That's really interesting to me. Next. This slide is about a project that you may have the chance to see at ZCAM a couple of years ago in the Critical Zone exhibition. This is a slide from a film by GeoCinema, Asia Bastirieva and Solvixus. It's called The Making of Earth. And it's actually online. I really recommend you to watch it on the Critical Zone website. And it's actually an annotated version of the film. And so I'm not going to go into details. I'm going to just read the brief description of Making of Earth. Making of Earth, quote, acts as an investigative documentary into large-scale systems and infrastructures amid growing ecological and political anxieties. The film begins inside a cinema globe situated at the center of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, then enters the Miyun and the Sriracha ground stations in Thailand, the Climate Research Center of Bangkok, conference halls in the Tengchong Volcanic District in China, and the risk management rooms of oil conglomerate Gazprom in Omsk, Russia. Under the guise of environmental protection, representatives of nation states, international organizations, and scientific bodies gather in search of an alternative geopolitical model. Through the disorientated gaze of the film, say GeoCinema, tensions are held between distance and intimacy, totalities and fragmentations, pasts and present futures of the Earth. I'm mentioning this project because it's this film, because it's and actually the whole GeoCinema project that you will find online at geocinema.net, because basically the question they pose is, okay, we realize that we need to unlearn to see like humans, but how do we see again? How do we tell stories about this again? How do we make films about this? Films that are not reproducing the usual documentary approach, the human-centered vision of this, and the usual orientating gaze that comes from enlightenment and from colonization, basically. GeoCinema did a very interesting research job about governing models, simulation models, calibration of technology to understand changes in the planet and how to exploit them. They talk a lot about stitches, as I said before, stitches between systems, and these stitches are actually really revealing about the fight for power, human stupidity, accidents of these realities, and of course power and control. Next. I'm coming to the end of this, and I'm approaching the fourth artistic practice I wanted to mention today. Because so far we've seen that you can draw alternative maps, you can do counter forensics, you can actually even undo or expose or question modeling systems, or you can perform them, or you can perform the infrastructures. And I'm not talking about performing like in theater. I'm talking about a different way of performing the infrastructure. The images you're seeing behind me are like two kind of random images, a project by artist Mario Santamaria, based in Barcelona actually. And he's investigating the way data travels. Actually, these are not very recent projects. Actually, one of the purposes of this little essay was actually being an introduction to things. So I'm not quoting or referring to very recent projects. It's like an introduction to these things, and you can go farther than that. That's why I'm quoting, like I'm mentioning a project that was actually carried out in 2016, so 6 years ago. Not a new project, for sure. Mario Santamaria says, quote, "My intention is not to investigate the way data travels. It is to move like data, to incarnate, to embody a process that is algorithmic, and to get into my trace body." This project is called Travel to My Website. And Mario Santamaria traveled from his home in Barcelona to the server where his personal website is hosted in northern Italy. And he followed the exact same route as the data. Instead of a travel agency, he planned the journey using Traceroute, which is this internet traffic diagnostic tool that records the steps of a single data packet bouncing from server to server until it reaches its destination. But where a single packet of information took about 60, 70 milliseconds to travel from start to destination, it took Mario 14 days to do the same, to complete the trip that led actually him through Switzerland, Sweden, Milan, Perugia in central Italy, and finally to Bergamo, North Italy. Then he documented this trip through notes and pictures that, in a strange feedback loop, posted on his own website. So this was a fascinating loop of transactions between a human body processing an impossible temporality, the temporality of data, and a machine that was actually designed to process human temporality. And this human temporality was represented by traces, an image, an entry in a blog, etc. And by switching the roles between bodies and data, Santamaria is actually slightly twisting the order of internet discourse. And the contemporary internet architectures desperately try to embody the myth of speed, smoothness, everything works with a click. And when you twist that, when you slightly change it or challenge that, something happens. He did other projects like trying to search for the images of the Google device, capturing itself in a mirror while doing this 360 degrees representation, especially in our museums. You find a mirror and all of a sudden that is the Google machine. He also made installations with like a Tor network where data packets do not follow the fastest way to the destination, but actually enjoy their time on Tor, and they never get out of it. They stay there. They are enjoying their time in a local area network. Next. Performance appears to be, and I'm coming to, I don't know how we're going with time, but I'm just like a couple minutes left. So performance, I take that Mario Santamaria is doing performance in a way. You could call it like a conceptual performance, conceptual object, social performance, like boys. I don't know, that's up to you. But the interesting part is performance, performing the infrastructure. Because, you know, if only for a short time, performance is actually give you the chance to make these machines function differently. It can also be a tactic to stage and deliberately enhance structural injustice, you know, or hidden hierarchies, like in the case of this project by Adam Bartle, for instance. This is a project by Adam Bartle called Unlock Life, and I quote, because the description is put in a very clear way: in fierce competition, global operating startups have swamped all major European cities with rental bikes and e-scooters in large numbers in the last couple of years. The careless attitude of the startup companies result in disapproval by most of the public and careless handling by the users. The colorful pop aesthetics of these rides, I keep quoting, attracts the urban youth who often cannot afford to ride them. Destruction and loss is a calculated part of the business, which is economically and ecologically unsustainable. After spending months or even years in the water, the scooters completely lost their attraction and are covered with mud and algae. Even new life can be found on these scooters in the form of small crabs or worms once they are pulled out of the water. And you know, the title Unlock Life is also, recalls Bartle, is also the signature advertising slogan of the e-scooter rental company line, Unlock Life. Next, this idea of performativity rather than performance. I'm coming to the end here. Let's call it performativity, not just performance. Artist invention sometimes, or often I would say, amplifies forms of performativity. Usually human performativity, but not necessarily just human performativity. The interesting part of the concept of performativity is that you can find it everywhere. If we're talking about humans, like human society, you can find performativity in fun, in love, in hate, in free time, leisure time, in despair, in moments of hope, in knowledge production. There is some performativity there. Performativity just subtly, or artist performativity subtly adds some fictional elements, slowly mutates the trivial into something unrecognizable, and vice versa. For instance, what if, like, these systems of planetary scale computation could be, quote unquote, performed by occupying their spaces and bending the temporalities? And again, what I have in mind is not a theatrical representation, which is also an interesting thing to do, but that's not what I had in mind. What I had in mind, it was actually the effort to inhabit these, for instance, these global platforms in a different way, you know? For instance, to bring the surface, to bring to the surface these frameworks, these technological frameworks, maybe through bodies, through human bodies, as Mario Santamaria did, or through the scooters, as Bartle did, or through unaware humans on the other side of the planet, as Eva and Franco Mattes did in their BEFNOED project, BEFNOED. This is a weird project, the one you're seeing here. It looks weird. It was actually even somehow disturbing, but also fun. Because Evan Franco Mattes used these crowdsourcing platforms to pay unknown people, unknown workers, let's say, to perform hilarious, weird, and sometimes really awkward acts like this one, you know, like watering with some soda or beer a dead fish stripped over your bare chest. What does that mean? It's completely meaningless and absurd, and even offensive in a way. The fact that most of the times these workers were from other continents, were getting like a couple of dollars a day makes a difference. So there was also this component, this colonial component in that. And then they were asked to publish these images on their social media of choice. Probably not Facebook, probably not Instagram, probably other platforms that we do not know or go on usually. So BFNOD, this project happens to be like a strange visualization of the asymmetrical nature of contemporary networks. It's also worth noticing that this is a strange performance. First, it's unaware. They were not telling these people that they were going to be part of another project. They probably told them afterwards, but at the first stage, they were just asked to perform this. Do this job. No question asked. Do it, and you will get paid. It's probably, I don't know. But it's interesting noticing that these performances and also the setup, the display in the gallery of this project, where the images of these recorded performances are shown on really impossibly located screens, like a screen facing the floor at this height. So you have to actually lie down and look up to see the images, or very up near the ceiling. So both the content and the display engage the participants in a game, basically, which is fun and weird. And I think that's probably the whole point of the project, actually engaging you in a game, which is also taking the best part of the spirit of internet subcultures and using it as a connector between people, exposing and twisting the complex visualization and exploitation processes that mediate such a connection. So it's not just like a theoretical or politically motivated statement. It's a game that actually uses the same language, the same approach of strange performativity going on the networks. You might not like it. You might find it offensive, discriminatory. Probably it is, but that was precisely the point. So, I came to the end. And at the end of this journey, one might arrive at the conclusion that the notion of infrastructure, where we started, is definitely not the right term. We are dealing with something much larger and much more complicated than a system of technical devices. A new geography actually emerges. As we understand it as an accidental mega machine, as Benjamin Bratton would say, based on different systems of cognition, we come to realize that we may need not only different names for it, but also different entry points into it. As I said, art and experimental design, especially when combined with unconventional research, suggest other ways of piercing the boundaries of disciplines, of disciplinary knowledge, or even commercial rules, of course. Finding alternative ways to inhabit and perform it, represent it, to question it, allows us to discover more about these infrastructures. And it certainly is a preliminary step to understanding of buried conflicts. And it's also necessary to question how the future is going to be designed and by whom. We need these kind of practices. This is our research. This is the poor man's research. To deal with these processes, some people are already designing the future. They are designing platforms. They are designing exploitation technologies. We probably have just little to do about that. We don't have the resources. All the more reasons to find alternative ways to approach technopolitics, in a way. As I say here, I guess, yeah, it's just an incomplete roadmap because it comes from my own standpoint, from my own experience. But I think as a practical roadmap, I think it could be useful anyway, even when it's incomplete. Especially if you leave, I try to leave enough entryways into this kind of conceptual map for others to expand it, to zoom into it, or to attempt to fill the gaps. You probably saw I didn't mention gender issues. I slightly mentioned class issues. I just briefly scratched the surface of the colonial issues, but that was not the purpose of this map. This model I proposed you today was really incomplete, but all the more reasons to expand it, or to change it, or to make it bigger than that. Next. Yeah, thank you.